They say some doors are meant to stay closed, that some secrets buried deep enough will eventually turn to dust and fade away with time. The people of Millbrook believe that too, until the night 17-year-old Emma Hartley pushed open the rusted door of the old Blackwood estate and discovered that some horrors don't fade. They wait, they grow, they become part of the very foundation upon which an entire town builds its lies. What Emma found behind that door didn't just haunt her. It unraveled every truth Millbrook had ever told itself, exposed wounds the town had spent 60 years trying to heal, and forced an entire community to face a question they'd been running from since 1965. How many innocent lives is a town's reputation worth? This is the story of what they hid, why they hid it, and the girl who refused to let the dead stay silent. The door that shouldn't exist. Emma Hartley had always been drawn to forgotten places. While other kids in Millbrook spent their weekends at the mall in the next town, over or down by Morrison's Creek, Emma wandered through abandoned buildings with her camera, documenting the slow death of things people had left behind. Her Instagram was a gallery of peeling wallpaper, shattered windows catching afternoon light, and rusted farm equipment slowly being consumed by wildflowers. Her mother called it morbid. Her therapist called it a coping mechanism. Emma called it the only thing that made sense anymore. It had been 8 months since her father died. 8 months since the car accident on Route 47 that the police said was quick, painless, over in an instant. 8 months since Emma's world had collapsed into a before and after so stark that she sometimes forgot what happiness had felt like. Her mother had responded by erasing every trace of grief from their home, packing away photos, donating clothes, repainting the walls a cheerful yellow that made Emma's stomach turn. But Emma couldn't erase anything. She carried her grief like stones in her pockets, growing heavier each day, pulling her toward places where decay was honest, where abandonment wasn't hidden behind fresh paint and forced smiles. That's what brought her to the Blackwood estate on a Friday afternoon in late September, when the autumn air smelled like wood smoke and dying leaves. The estate sat on 12 acres at the edge of Millbrook, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. The Blackwood family had been wealthy once, old money from timber and railways, but they disappeared in the 60s, under circumstances no one seemed willing to discuss. The house had stood vacant ever since, slowly surrendering to time and weather. The town council had talked about demolition for years, but something always seemed to delay it. Budget concerns, environmental studies, permits that never quite came through. The Blackwood estate remained, a Gothic monument to the past, surrounded by rusted iron fencing and no trespassing signs that everyone in Millbrook had learned to ignore. Emma had photographed the exterior a dozen times, but she'd never gone inside. The other kids did sometimes, usually on dares or drunk on cheap beer, but they never stayed long. They said the house had bad energy, that it felt wrong somehow, that even the bravest among them couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Emma had dismissed those stories as small-town superstition until the afternoon she finally decided to cross the threshold. The front door hung open, one hinge broken, creaking softly in the breeze. Emma stepped inside and was immediately struck by how intact everything was. She'd expected vandalism, graffiti, the usual destruction that came with abandoned places in reach of bored teenagers. Instead, she found a home frozen in time. Furniture still arranged in the parlor, though covered in decades of dust. Paintings on the walls, their subjects barely visible through the grime. A grand staircase sweeping upward, its banister draped in cobwebs that caught the light like tattered lace. Emma moved through the room slowly, camera in hand, capturing images of a life interrupted. A dining table still set for a meal never eaten. A study with books open on the desk, pages yellowed and brittle. A music room where a piano sat silent, sheet music still resting on its stand. It was beautiful in its desolation, but there was something else too. Something that made the hair on the back of Emma's neck stand up. A feeling of wrongness that she couldn't quite name. She found the door on the second floor, at the end of a hallway lined with empty bedrooms. It was different from the others. Heavier, made of thick oak with iron reinforcements, and a lock that looked far too modern for a house this old. Emma tried the handle, expecting resistance. But to her surprise, it turned. The lock had been broken, recently by the look of it. Someone had been here before her. The door opened onto a staircase leading down. Not to the first floor. Emma had already been there. This led somewhere else, somewhere below the house itself. Every instinct Emma had screamed at her to turn around, to leave, to forget she'd ever seen this door. But grief had made her reckless, and curiosity had always been her weakness. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and descended into the darkness. The stairs were steep and narrow, the walls pressing in on both sides. The air grew colder with each step, and Emma could hear water dripping somewhere below. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, her feet touched concrete. She swept her phone's light across the space and felt her breath catch. She was in a basement, but not the kind you'd expect to find under an old house. This was something else entirely. The room stretched out before her, far larger than should have been possible, with a low ceiling supported by concrete pillars. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, most of them empty, but some still holding boxes and containers. In the center of the room sat a large metal table, and next to it, a filing cabinet with several drawers hanging open. But it was what lay beyond the table that made Emma's blood run cold. Against the far wall stood a row of doors. Not regular doors, but heavy metal ones like you might find in a prison or a hospital. Each had a small window at eye level, reinforced with wire mesh, and a number painted in white. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Emma's hands shook as she ached the first door. Through the small window she could see a tiny room, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with concrete walls and floor, a metal cot with no mattress, a toilet with no seat. Nothing else. She moved to the second door. Same thing. The third, the fourth, all identical, all empty, all absolutely terrifying in their sterile institutional bleakness. What was this place? Why was it here, hidden beneath a mansion that everyone in town treated like a harmless relic? Emma turned to the filing cabinet, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The drawers were labeled with years: 1963, 1964, 1965. She pulled open the 1965 drawer and found it stuffed with files, each one marked with a number and a name. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the first file. The name on the tab was Sarah Chen, age 14. Inside were intake forms, medical records, and handwritten notes. Emma's eyes scanned the pages, her confusion growing with each word she read. Admitted for treatment of moral deficiency, exhibiting signs of willful disobedience and corrupting influence. Treatment protocol, isolation, correction therapy, behavioral modification. Emma pulled out another file. Michael Torres, age 15. Similar notes. Then another. Jessica Morgan, age 16. And another. Thomas Reed, age 14. All of them teenagers. All of them admitted in 1965. All of them subjected to treatments that made Emma's stomach turn. Ice baths, sleep deprivation, something called aversion therapy that she didn't understand but sounded horrific. There were dozens of files, maybe 100. Emma's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This place hidden beneath the Blackwood estate had been some kind of facility, but for what? Why were all these kids here? And where were they now? She was reaching for another file when she heard it. A sound from above. Footsteps on the floor overhead, slow and deliberate, moving toward the staircase. Emma froze, her blood turning to ice. She wasn't alone. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Emma looked around frantically for another way out, but there was nothing. One entrance, one exit, and someone was blocking it. The footsteps began to descend, and Emma did the only thing she could think of. She ducked behind one of the metal shelving units, turned off her phone's flashlight, and held her breath. The basement fell into complete darkness except for a pale beam of light that grew stronger as whoever was coming down approached the bottom of the stairs. Emma pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it would give her away. The footsteps reached the concrete floor and stopped. A flashlight beam swept across the room, methodically searching. Emma could see the silhouette of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew this space well. "I know you're down here," a voice said, calm and cold. "I saw your car parked on the road. You shouldn't have come here, Emma." He knew her name. Whoever this was, he knew who she was. Emma's mind raced. How could she run? How could she get past him to the stairs? She was trapped, and whoever this man was, he had been watching her, following her, waiting for this moment. The flashlight beam swept closer, passing just inches from where Emma crouched. She could see him more clearly now, an older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a dark jacket and carrying something in his other hand. Something that looked like a radio. "Your father was curious too," the man said, and Emma felt her entire world tilt. He found this place about a year ago, started asking questions, looking into old records. "You know what curiosity cost him, don't you, Emma? The car accident. Route 47. Quick and painless. Over in an instant. Except it wasn't an accident, was it?" Emma's grief transformed into something else in that moment. Rage. White-hot and all-consuming. This man was telling her that her father had been murdered, that the accident that had destroyed her life, that had broken her mother, that had left a hole in the world that could never be filled, it hadn't been an accident at all. She didn't think. She just moved. Emma grabbed one of the metal boxes from the shelf beside her and threw it as hard as she could toward the opposite side of the basement. It crashed into the shelving units with a tremendous clang, and the man's flashlight immediately swung in that direction. Emma ran. She sprinted toward the stairs, her feet pounding on the concrete, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear the man shouting behind her, could hear his footsteps giving chase, but she didn't look back. She hit the stairs at full speed, taking them two at a time, her hands grasping at the walls to keep her balance. She burst through the door at the top and kept running, through the hallway, down the grand staircase, across the parlor, and out into the fading afternoon light. She didn't stop until she reached her car, fumbling with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. As she peeled out onto the road, her tires kicking up gravel, she looked in the rearview mirror. The man stood in the doorway of the Blackwood estate, watching her go, the light behind him making him look like a shadow given form. Emma drove straight to the police station, her mind reeling, her father's face flashing before her eyes. She'd found something terrible, something that had gotten her father killed, something that an entire town had been hiding for 60 years. And now she knew. Now she understood why the Blackwood estate had never been demolished, why permits never came through, why everyone in Millbrook treated it like a harmless ruin instead of the horror it truly was. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some secrets buried deep enough are supposed to turn to dust and fade away. But Emma Hartley had never been good at leaving things alone. The town that built itself on silence. The Millbrook Police Department was housed in a small brick building on Main Street, between the post office and Betty's Diner. Emma had been there once before, about a month after her father's funeral, when she'd gone to pick up his personal effects from the accident. She remembered the pitying looks the officers had given her, the gentle way they'd spoken, as if she were made of glass and might shatter at any moment. There was no pity in Officer Ray Morrison's eyes when Emma burst through the door that Friday evening, breathless and trembling, demanding to speak to someone in charge. Morrison was in his 50s, a Millbrook native who'd been on the force for 30 years. Everyone knew him. He coached Little League, organized the 4th of July parade, and had a laugh that could fill a room. But he wasn't laughing now. He was looking at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Emma," he said carefully, standing up from behind the front desk. "What's going on? Are you hurt?" The words poured out of her in a torrent. The Blackwood estate, the hidden basement, the cells, the files, the man who'd chased her, the things he'd said about her father. Morrison listened without interrupting, his face growing more grave with each detail. When Emma finally fell silent, exhausted from the telling, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "It's not a story," Emma said, her voice breaking. "It's real. There are files down there, dozens of them, kids who were locked up in that place. And my dad, that man said my dad was asking questions, that he'd found the basement too. His accident wasn't an accident, was it? Someone killed him to keep him quiet." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Emma, your father's death was investigated thoroughly. It was an accident. A tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless." "You're lying," Emma said, and the certainty in her voice surprised even her. "You're all lying. The whole town is lying." What was that place? What happened to those kids? Morrison looked at her for a long moment, and Emma saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed deeply and said, "Wait here." He disappeared into the back offices, and Emma heard low voices, urgent and tense. 5 minutes later, Morrison returned with 2 other people. One was Linda Reeves, a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes to match. The other was someone Emma recognized immediately. Mayor Patricia Blackwood, great-granddaughter of the family that had owned the estate. A woman who'd run Millbrook for the last 15 years with an iron fist wrapped in Chamber of Commerce smiles. "Miss Hartley," Mayor Blackwood said, her voice smooth as honey and twice as sweet. "Officer Morrison tells me you've had quite an experience this evening. I think it's time we had a conversation. Would you come with us, please?" They led Emma to a conference room at the back of the station. Chief Reeves closed the door, and the 4 of them sat down around a scarred wooden table that had probably seen 1,000 interrogations. Emma felt like she was the one being interrogated now, despite being the one who'd come for help. "First things first," Chief Reeves said. "Are you hurt? Did this man who chased you harm you in any way?" "No," Emma said. "But he knew my name. He knew about my father. He admitted—" "Emma," Mayor Blackwood interrupted gently, "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. What you found today is part of Millbrook's history. A painful, complicated part that this town made the decision long ago to put behind us." "Put behind you?" Emma stared at her in disbelief. "There were kids locked in cells down there, teenagers. What happened to them?" Mayor Blackwood exchanged glances with Chief Reeves and Officer Morrison. Finally, she spoke. "In the 1960s, my great-grandfather Harrison Blackwood ran a private residential facility on the estate. It was called the Blackwood Academy for Moral Correction. It was a product of its time. A time when parents who had children they couldn't control, children who were different or rebellious or simply didn't fit the mold, would send them away to be fixed. The academy accepted troubled youth from all over the state, promising to reform them through discipline and structure. Locked them in cells, you mean," Emma said. "Subjected them to torture. The methods used were legal at the time," Mayor Blackwood said, though her voice had lost some of its smoothness. "What we would consider abusive now was standard practice then. But yes, the academy was harsh. Too harsh. And in 1965 something happened. Something terrible." Emma leaned forward. "What happened?" Chief Reeves took over the story. "There was a fire. In the middle of the night, June 17, 1965, the facility was housing 43 young people at the time. The fire started in the basement level, where the dormitories were located. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. The doors, those metal doors you saw, they locked from the outside. For security, they said, to keep the kids from running away." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. "They couldn't get out. 11 of them made it," Mayor Blackwood said quietly. 11 out of 43. The others, they died from smoke inhalation. The academy was shut down immediately. My great-grandfather was investigated, but no charges were ever filed. The official report called it a tragic accident, faulty wiring in an old building. The families of the deceased were compensated quietly. The survivors were sent home with instructions to never speak of what happened. And Millbrook tried to move on. To forget, you mean," Emma said. "Tried to bury it. We made a choice," Mayor Blackwood said, and now there was steel in her voice. "This town was dying in the 60s. The timber industry was collapsing, the railway was rerouting, young people were leaving in droves. Millbrook needed to rebuild, to attract new families, new businesses. We couldn't do that with the shadow of the Blackwood Academy hanging over us. So yes, we chose to let it fade into history. We chose to protect this town's future." "What about the victims?" Emma demanded. "What about their families? Don't they deserve to know the truth?" "The families knew," Chief Reeves said. "They were all told, they were compensated. Many of them chose to move away, to start over somewhere else. The ones who stayed made the same choice we did, to let the past stay in the past." Emma shook her head, trying to process what she was hearing. "And my father? Where does he fit into this?" The room fell silent. Morrison looked down at his hands. Chief Reeves shifted uncomfortably. Mayor Blackwood's perfect composure finally cracked. "Just a little." "Your father was a history teacher," Mayor Blackwood said finally. "A good one. He believed in primary sources, in original research. About a year ago, he started working on a local history project with his students. One of them mentioned hearing stories about the Blackwood estate from their grandmother. Your father started digging. He found the basement. He found the files. And someone killed him for it, Emma said. No, Mayor Blackwood said firmly. No, Emma. Your father's death was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident, but an accident. He came to me with what he found, and we had a long conversation about it. I explained the town's position, the choice that was made. He understood. He agreed to let it go. I don't believe you, Emma whispered. It's the truth, Morrison said, speaking for the first time. Your dad and I were friends, Emma. We played poker together every Thursday night. The week before he died, he told me he decided to drop the Blackwood research. He said some things were better left alone. He said he didn't want to hurt this town, didn't want to open old wounds that had finally healed. Then why was he on Route 47 that night? Emma asked. That road doesn't go anywhere he needed to be. He was coming back from the county archives, Chief Reeves said. We checked. He'd been there earlier that day, looking at property records for a different project. It started raining on his way home. The road was slick. He took the curve too fast. It was an accident, Emma. I know you're grieving. I know you want answers, but sometimes bad things just happen. There's no conspiracy, no cover-up, just tragedy. Emma wanted to believe them. God, how she wanted to believe them. The alternative was too horrible, that her father had been murdered, that these people she'd known her whole life had been complicit, that the town she'd grown up in was built on a foundation of lies and dead children. But she'd seen the basement. She'd read the files. She'd heard the man in the darkness say, Your father was curious too. Who was the man who chased me? Emma asked. Another exchange of glances. That would be Richard Cooper, Mayor Blackwood said. He's our groundskeeper for town properties. We asked him to keep an eye on the Blackwood estate after your father's interest in it. We didn't want kids getting hurt down there. The stairs are dangerous, the structure is unstable. Richard was just doing his job. He threatened me. He scared you, Morrison corrected gently. There's a difference. He's an old man who takes his responsibilities seriously, maybe too seriously. But he wasn't going to hurt you, Emma. They were so smooth, so practiced. Every answer ready, every explanation reasonable. Emma could feel them trying to wrap her up in their version of events, to make her doubt what she'd seen and heard, to convince her that her instincts were just grief playing tricks. But Emma had spent 8 months learning to trust the weight of her grief, the solid reality of her pain. And that same instinct was screaming at her now that these people were lying. I want to see those files, she said. All of them. I want to know the names of every child who died in that fire. I want to contact their families. They deserve to know that someone remembers, that someone cares about what happened. Emma, Mayor Blackwood said, her voice taking on a warning edge. I understand you're upset, but you need to think very carefully about what you're proposing. You're 17 years old. You're still grieving your father. If you start making accusations, spreading stories about things that happened 60 years ago, you're going to hurt a lot of people, families who have moved on, a town that's thrived by choosing hope over tragedy. And you're going to hurt yourself. Colleges look at things like this, Emma. They don't like troublemakers. There it was. The velvet threat. Play along or face consequences. Emma Saint. Up. Am I free to go? Chief Reeves nodded. Of course. But Emma, we're going to need you to stay away from the Blackwood estate. It's dangerous, and as of tomorrow morning, we'll be posting security there around the clock. If you go back, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand? Perfectly, Emma said. She walked out of the police station into a night that had grown cold and sharp. The streets of Millbrook were quiet, the shops closed, warm light glowing in the windows of homes where families were sitting down to dinner, watching TV, living normal lives built on a foundation of buried secrets. Emma got in her car and sat there for a long moment, her hands on the steering wheel, her mind racing. They wanted her to let it go, to be a good girl, to trust the adults, to believe that sometimes bad things just happen and the best thing to do is move forward. But Emma had learned something in the 8 months since her father died. She'd learned that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, that healing didn't mean pretending wounds had never existed, that the only way through grief was straight through its heart, acknowledging every painful truth, sitting with every difficult memory. The same was true for Millbrook. The town might have built itself into something prosperous and peaceful, but it had done so by paving over graves and silencing ghosts. And Emma's father had died because he'd tried to give those ghosts a voice. She couldn't bring him back, but she could finish what he'd started. Emma pulled out her phone and opened her photo gallery. Before leaving the Blackwood basement, in those frantic moments before she'd heard the footsteps, she'd done what any kid of her generation would do. She'd taken pictures, dozens of them. The cells, the filing cabinet, the files themselves. The images were dark and blurry, but they were there. They were proof. She scrolled through them now, stopping on one particular file that had caught her eye. The name on the tab was Hannah Morrison, age 15. Admitted for treatment of moral deficiency, exhibiting signs of willful disobedience. Morrison. The same last name as Officer Ray Morrison, the man who just looked her in the eye and told her to let it go. Emma did a quick Google search on her phone. Hannah Morrison Millbrook, 1965. Nothing. She tried Blackwood Academy fire victims. Nothing official, just a few vague references on local history forums. She tried Blackwood Fire 1965 deaths. Still nothing concrete. It was as if it had been erased. 60 years of determined forgetting, of burying the evidence, of paying people off and shutting people up. But somewhere there had to be records. Somewhere there had to be people who remembered. The 11 survivors that Mayor Blackwood had mentioned. Where were they now? What had they seen? What could they tell her? Emma knew what she had to do. She had to find the survivors. She had to make them talk. She had to uncover the full truth about what happened at the Blackwood Academy and why her father had really died. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. She needed someone who believed her, someone who wouldn't be silenced by threats or intimidated by the powerful people who ran this town. Emma thought for a moment, then made a decision. She opened her messages and scrolled to a name she hadn't contacted in months. Marcus Chen, a year older than her, now a freshman at State studying journalism. He'd been one of her father's favorite students, always asking questions, always digging deeper, always refusing to accept easy answers. And more importantly, his last name was Chen. Sarah Chen had been one of the names in those files, age 14, one of the victims. Emma typed out a message. Marcus, I need your help with something. It's about your family. Call me when you can. It's urgent. She hit send and started her car. As she pulled away from the police station, she saw Officer Morrison watching from the window, his phone pressed to his ear, already making a call. Already warning someone that Emma Hartley wasn't going to let this go. Good, Emma thought. Let them worry, let them scramble. Because she was done being the grieving daughter, done being the fragile teenager who needed to be protected and managed. She was her father's daughter, and she was going to find the truth. No matter what it cost, no matter who tried to stop her. Some doors are meant to stay closed, some secrets are meant to stay buried. But not anymore. Not if Emma Hartley had anything to say about it. The ghosts of 43 children had waited 60 years for someone to speak their names. Emma was going to make sure the whole world heard them. And this time, Millbrook wouldn't be able to bury the truth with money and threats and convenient accidents. This time, the dead were going to have their day. Message. The truth may be buried, but it never dies. It waits in the darkness, patient and persistent, for someone brave enough to bring it to light. We all have a choice, when confronted with difficult truths, to look away and preserve our comfort, or to face them and demand justice. The easy path is silence. The right path is speaking up, even when your voice shakes, even when powerful people tell you to stop, even when the cost is high. Because some things, truth, justice, the dignity of the dead, are worth fighting for, and sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to forget.